we'll get started. Thank you everyone for joining the monthly LP Council meeting. Just a little bit of housekeeping to start. It is not too late to register for the SBIA's Outlook 2021 conference next week. If you're not already registered for it. In addition, if you are already registered, the platform is up and running, and you can kind of explore it and see ways to set up one-on-one meetings or other networking during the event. And in addition, a little bit further in the future, Virtual Capital Links is now open for registration. And with that, I am going to introduce Beth Manzi, COO of PEF Services. PEF is an administrator many of us know well that handles many SBIC funds in addition to many other private funds as well. Beth is going to take us through many of the forms that SBICs need to fill out and some of the information that's embedded in there. This topic was a request of some LPs. And I would encourage you all that if there is a topic in the future that you would like to have an LP Council meeting on, please feel free to reach out to me anytime or to Alex Fripp. Thanks, and now I'll turn to Beth.
Great, thank you, David. And I am going to share my screen so we can get started. Okay, you can see my screen, right, David?
Yes.
You're good? Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. I do appreciate the opportunity. I know we do talk to LPs that are invested in the SBIC funds from time to time, discuss reporting needs, data that you're looking for, and other areas. So I'm really excited to be able to talk to you in this capacity as well. I know there's a lot of data in the SBIC forms that they file, and you may not be as familiar with all the data points, but I think the purpose of this call is to go through the data points that are included in the SBA reporting and to see, you know, what might overlap with the needs that you have, and then determine the best way to get that data from the fund managers, or maybe there's additional data points that you weren't aware of that are being collected through these forms that would be useful to you. And so, you know, we want to go over that as well. And then at the end, we'll leave time for questions and Q&A. And I'm curious to see if there's any additional needs people have for data that's not included in the forms, because we are always, you know, as a fund administrator, we're wanting to make sure that we can provide all the required data. We have so much data in the accounting records and, you know, the portfolio company data that we're collecting. That if there's a need for it, you know, on the LP side, it's in our best interest to work with the fund managers, you know, to get you the data that you need. So be appreciative of any feedback you have in that area as well. And so I'd like to get started going through the presentation. This is just a little bit of my background. I have a lot of experience in the industry on both the public accounting side, the fund admin side, and also working with a fund manager. So I've seen all three angles, and I think that, you know, complements my role at PEF nicely, and, you know, working with the clients to, you know, figure out their needs and how we can best serve them, as well as from a fund administrator perspective, making sure we're doing things efficiently as well. So my contact information is here. Please feel free to reach out after the call if you have any additional questions as well. So I put together just a quick high-level agenda of what I thought would be helpful. And I do want to go through some of the forms and the data points that are included in the forms. And again, curious to get your feedback on, you know, what data points are useful for you. And talk a little bit about how the SBA uses the data and how they track certain data points, demographics, and things like that. And then also, as I mentioned before, how you're using the data and what you're using it for, and then, you know, how to best gather the data most efficiently. Because as we walk through the forms, you will see that they are all PDF format. They are the 468, which is the largest one. It's done in the SBA's application, the SBIC web, which you may or may not be familiar with. And it is a database of, I don't know if there's an actual database behind it, but, there's data that goes into it, but the only output that we see is PDF forms. And I know that's not the best way for you to get the data. You're not going to want to pour through PDF forms. So we can discuss the best way to get the data that you need. And then of course, questions. I'll take questions at the end. Okay. So on the 468 is basically the detailed financial statement that the SBICs are filing. If they're levered funds, they're filing it quarterly. If they're unlevered funds, they're filing it annually. And the unlevered funds have less reporting requirements. So some of the information included in these forms isn't required of the unlevered funds, but I'll try and point that out as we go through it. I'll focus on a couple of the forms with, I think, what is the most relevant information, but if there's information on some of the other pages that will be useful to you, I can pull them up at the end and walk through that as well. But there is information on commitments and guarantees. So if there's any outstanding commitments to portfolio companies that the SBIC is obligated to fund at a future date, that'll be contained in the 468. Any guarantees that they've made to portfolio companies or to third parties on behalf of portfolio companies, that'll be included as well. I will go through the schedule of investments in detail because that probably has the most data points that would be useful to you in the 468. And there is a detailed schedule of realized investments. So if you're curious about what's behind some of those realized gains, this is a transaction level analysis of the realized gains. Non-cash income, which is really important to the SBIC funds because their distributions, at least for the levered funds, are driven off their REID calculation, their retained earnings available for distribution. So anything that's considered non-cash income is not included in the income that they can distribute, obviously, because they didn't receive that cash. So that's an important schedule for the SBICs. And then there's delinquency information. So if any loans or investments are delinquent, and the SBA defines a delinquency as more than 30 days past due. So if it's any interest or principal payments that are more than 30 days past due, they would be listed on this form. The amount that's delinquent, the value of the collateral, the days delinquent, things like that is on that form. At the portfolio company financial information, I'll show you this page as well. This has financial statement information from the underlying portfolio companies. So if you're looking to do an analysis at the portfolio company level, this data would probably be helpful to you. And we also at PEF, we have a proprietary application where we collect this information through an upload from our clients. So this information is available in an Excel format, should you need it or request it from the fund managers. And the cumulative investment performance schedule, this is filed annually for leveraged funds. It has your metrics, so your IRR, distributions to paid in, and total value to paid in are included in that form as well. The SBICs, the leverage funds, will submit their operating plan annually. I'm assuming that this information is more SBA specific, but as it pertains to the performance of the fund and, future pipeline and things like that, that information is most likely duplicated in your quarterly or annual letter that you're getting from your fund managers as well. So I'm not sure that this would have any additional information that you would want to see. It's in a narrative format, so everyone's different. And it specifically relates to their SBIC investment plan, their wind down plan, things like that. If you do have some SBIC funds in liquidation, there's an additional liquidation supplement that's filed, and this has basically exit values and timing of exits for the remaining investments. So that information could be helpful as well. And so I would like to take a look at the first page, the schedule of investments with you. This is what the form looks like. It's a little bit confusing if you're not familiar with all the data points. But it includes, this section will include a transaction level cost roll forward. So it's going to be any purchases, sales, PIK, OID, probably too much in, too low of a level of detail for what you're looking for. It does have ownership percentages, actual and voting percentages of each portfolio company. Should they, if they don't just hold loans, if they're holding equity positions as well, it will have the ownership percentages and the interest rates, which are sometimes helpful. And this status is going to tell you if it's a performing, most of the investments are performing. Some of them are non-performing, which means they're probably not accruing the PIK interest. And then some of them could be delinquent. And there's some other statuses there as well. But if you're, looking for that information, here's where you would find it on the 468. It'll have maturity dates, repayment terms, collateral for the loans and investments. And then for the equity positions, it'll have the share, type of shares, number of shares, market liquidity. For the most part, these are non-liquid, not publicly traded positions. But if it was something that was listed, it would have, an indicator here that it's a publicly traded security. And it'll also have the, original investment date. So this is more accounting information, the purchases and sales, the ending cost and the ending value. Each portfolio company will have a separate section like this for each security that it holds. And then the portfolio company summary information, this is at the portfolio company level. This will appear up here. So the total for each portfolio company, the cost and the fair value is up top. And then there's a separate section below that for each security that they hold. Let's see if there was anything else. Okay, so that's basically the cost roll forward of the investments, cost and fair value of the investments. The next page I wanted to look at was the portfolio company financial information. And some funds do this a little bit differently, but this form should have the most recent 3 quarterly periods reported on a trailing 12-month basis. And there are certain data points that are required. If it's an equity security, there's some additional data points. Some data points aren't reported if you only hold a loan position. And then the unlevered funds, they're not required to report all of the data points. There's a limited number of data points that they're required to submit. And so this, if you're looking at it from a quarterly 468 perspective for a levered fund, you're seeing the quarterly financials of the portfolio companies, again, on a trailing 12-month basis each quarter. And this is demographic info or industry and geographic region information, if that exposure information is helpful. So it's done by the NAICS code. So everything is standardized. You can compare apples to apples across funds when you're using NAICS codes. And the NAICS code, as well as a description, is included in the form. And then down here is the geographic information. So where the portfolio company is located, city and state. And this will indicate if they're in an LMI zone or not. And then there's, again, the ownership percentage is repeated on this form. This is basically the same information that's on the 11P. The schedule of investments, this is carried forward to the 20P as well. Okay. And the SBA, for some of these data points, the SBA, the ones that aren't obvious, they provide guidance. So there are definitions for, the equity value, the enterprise value, what's considered a full-time employee or what's considered employees, how to calculate burn rate, things like that. So they do provide definitions. So you should be able to, again, compare apples to apples across funds and portfolio companies, because people should be working off standardized definitions there. Okay. And the next page is the cumulative investment performance. So again, this is for each portfolio company. This is for levered funds. They'll report this annually to SBA. And it has each portfolio company, basically total dollars in, total dollars out, and the ending value. So it's the, gross receipts to the total dollars invested, and the gross receipts plus the fair value at the end of the period to the total dollars invested. So you can see your returns for each by portfolio company on this schedule. And the next form that has some information that might be of interest is the Form 1031. This is submitted to SBA within the 30 days of each financing. So whether it's an initial investment in a portfolio company and then every single follow-on investment from there, they submit a Form 1031 for that. And it does have some demographic information on the portfolio company. I will say some, fund managers are better than others at making sure that that information is as accurate as possible. Sometimes they don't have the information, but we have kind of guidelines to help them fill out that information so the SBA can use it for what they need to. And it'll also have the purpose of the financing and then high-level investment information as well. It'll also have the financial data. It's pretty much the same financial data that we just looked at on the portfolio company financial information page of the 468, just not as detailed. It has less data points there. Some of the other SBA forms that are required to be filed with the initial investment in each portfolio company. The Form 652 is the assurance of compliance for non-discrimination. So this is, this is each portfolio company just representing that they're not going to discriminate. So it does hold, there are other laws that require them to comply with that as well, but this is an additional form where they're signing that they are not going to discriminate. And then the Form 480 is the size status declaration. So this is from the portfolio company confirming that they are a small business according to their financial information or the NAICS code, so that the portfolio manager can make that conclusion that they're a small business, that they're an eligible investment for the SBIC fund. So the Form 1031 has 3 parts. The first part has just portfolio company data points, again, name, address, and contact information. It has the industry, again, this information is also on the Form 468. And then this is the demographic information about the ownership and the CEO of the portfolio company. So the percentage owned by these specific demographics, and also they do track women and veteran owned portfolio companies as well. And the CEO or president, the demographics there. And I know everybody is more concerned than they were, or more aware than in the past of demographic information, the ESG data. So these points, they are already being gathered by SBA, and SBA has been tracking it for some time now. And parts B and C of the Form 1031, this is again similar to on the 468 portfolio company financial information. And then this is the financing information for the current investment. So the purpose of financing is on the 1031 for each financing that they do. And then it'll give just, again, high level details of what type of a security it is, and if there's the interest rate for the loan and debt instruments, and the ownership percentage for the equity investments. Okay, so now we can look at a couple of ways that the SBA uses the data. The most relevant report is probably this last one here. So I will start with that one actually. I will just pull it up here rather than click on the hyperlink. That'll be easier. Oh, this one is not bookmarked. Okay. So this is the SBA report to Congress. So it basically tells, gives them specific data points about the SBICs in the program, So this is if you're not familiar with the SBIC program or not as familiar with the SBIC program, this is a great document to get a lot of information about how the program works, and the purpose of the program and all of the benefits of the program. So this is actually a very, very informative document. Later on in the report, there are data points that they report on, and I just want to get to those. I think it was page 33. This, I know, this was an interesting metric. These are the leverage draws that the SBIC funds are drawing down. You'll notice from fiscal year 18 to 19, it went down. Most likely went down a little bit in 2020. What I heard was debenture draws were down because, especially in 2020, the SBIC funds were accessing the PP, or the portfolio companies rather, they were accessing the PPP loans. So they weren't looking to the portfolio or the SBIC funds necessarily for funding all the time because they had access to the PPP loans. So I'm thinking that in this fiscal year, when those start to go away, that the leverage draws will increase again. And then this is the number of small businesses, underserved small businesses financed by SBICs. And the underserved businesses are the minority-owned businesses that they're tracking. So you'll see it's kind of holding steady around 300 for the past few years there. And then this is a financing by states. So again, this is they aggregate the information based on where the portfolio companies are located across the program, and it splits it out by state. So that's an interesting metric as well. And there are some in the other reports. The Small Business Investment Program report. Hold on, let me find that one. This is the report to Congress. Okay, let me click on this link. Actually, this is the one that I just went over. This one is the report to Congress. Okay. Okay, so these are metrics on the underserved businesses. So they're businesses that women, veterans, and minorities own, or they're located in underserved geographic areas, which are the LMI areas. So this also has additional demographic information, the number of jobs supported by the SBIC financings, and it also has demographic information, I think on the next page back here. When they started tracking, they didn't start tracking some of the demographic information till around, till some later years. And actually now I'm not seeing that. I'm sorry, I apologize. The ESG data points I thought were in this table. They might be in the other one. But they do have information on the ESG metrics on how the small businesses are supporting the women-owned, veteran-owned, minority-owned businesses as well. So those are in these reports. So if that information is of interest, I would take a look at those reports as well. They are published annually. So the latest report, this latest report, is based on fiscal year 2019, but it's the current one that was just submitted. And the other report to Congress, this one I think that we had, that was the latest one, was based on fiscal year 2019. So the fiscal year 2020 report, just open this one. Yeah, was not available when I looked. Okay, and then the last thing we wanted to cover is, again, using the data. So hopefully in the forms, you saw some data points that would be useful in the way that you track your information and the data points that you track across your fund managers. But it's just a matter of getting the information. So a lot of the information, again, you're not going to want to sort through the PDF reports necessarily and, you know, pull that data out. But most of the fund managers will have, especially when it comes to like the cumulative investment performance, that should be available in some kind of Excel or database format. And it's just a matter of, if you're looking for high level information, just, you know, what are the metrics, or you're looking for more detailed information, meaning what are, you know, you want to see the actual cash flows and you want to check the calculations and you want to do additional calculations on the data. So it's just a matter of what level of detail. And we've seen some LPs of the SBIC funds, it really varies. Some of them are looking for that detailed cash flow information, and some of them are looking for more of the higher level information. When it comes to the fair value by industry and geographic region, a lot of the LPs are tracking this, again, across their portfolios, so they can determine their exposure to certain industries and certain regions, which I think everybody was really scrambling to do about a year ago at this time, when certain industries were much more affected by the pandemic than others, and certain geographic regions as well. And so I think people, if they weren't tracking that information, they definitely started to track it by that time, and they are tracking it. And also the number of jobs, and again, that ESG data with the minority, women, veteran-owned businesses, women, veteran-run, minority-run businesses with, you know, somebody in the CEO position for those portfolio companies. That information we're finding is, people are asking for it more often now. People are starting to, some funds may have started to track those metrics a while ago, but for the funds that haven't started to track those metrics, they are starting now. And they are starting to just get a baseline of, you know, what is typical for a fund manager, for fund managers that focus on ESG, what is it, you know, where do the typical data points lie? And starting to rate fund managers by their effort to maximize, you know, the ESG benefits with their dollars. So I was on a webinar last week where they were talking about different you know, just starting to get a baseline of different rankings for some ESG data points, and really, you know, not knowing what that standard should be yet, but just seeing what the baseline is, where people kind of fall currently, to then determine, you know, how to rank them and what is a good ranking and what is a good rating from there. But we're definitely starting to see fund managers put procedures in place around the ESG data points. So, do we have any questions, David?
Yeah, if folks could submit questions via the Q&A, I thought I might kick it off.
Sure.
You know, who's usually filling out these forms? Would the GPs be spending a lot of time on this themselves? Would PEF be able to do much of it for them?
That's a good question. Yeah, for our clients, our clients don't touch SBIC Web, so we would prepare all the filings. They would, of course, review them and approve them, but we would take care of all the filings. They would obviously be providing us with the information, and we have a proprietary application where they can upload a lot of that, like the portfolio company information. And then we have a process to populate it in the SBIC Web. And then for the fund managers who don't outsource their reporting function, yeah, they would be doing it in-house.
Do you know if the SBA systematically checks this data? Because, you know, we know that so many SBIC funds, you know, co-invest together. They must be submitting data on the same underlying companies. what happens if they, accidentally submit data for the same company that's different?
Yeah, that's a good question. The SBA analysts do review the 468s on a quarterly basis, and they will reach out if they have questions. I don't know for sure that's a data point that they look for, but I would assume it is. Yeah, especially when it comes to fair values. If they have same security, in two different funds, that would be one thing that I'm sure they would check to make sure that the fair value is consistent.
And if I were to ask one of my GPs that's an SBIC today, just run a calculation of, say, how many jobs have been created during the time they've invested in the portfolio companies, is that something they could calculate with the data they have today, or would they have to go collect more data?
Yeah, I think on the jobs that have been created, that's not really tracked anywhere in the forms. It's just that the jobs supported. So for instance, portfolio company A has 100 employees at the end of the first year, and it has 200 employees at the end of the second year. It doesn't necessarily mean that 100 jobs were created. It could, you could infer that, I guess, but there could be other factors as well. It could have been an acquisition of another company, and so the jobs weren't created. So I don't know that that's a data point that they have handy.
Okay. And then we got a few questions from the audience.
Okay.
One question, and hopefully you'll understand. Can you touch on the capital impairment worksheet?
Sure.
What it's like and how often that is completed?
Sure, absolutely. The capital impairment worksheet calculates the fund's level of impairment for leveraged SBIC funds. It's completed quarterly, and it's not filed with the SBA. It's kept in their files, but it is reviewed when they have their SBA exam. And the analysts they know what the capital impairment calculation is. So if capital impairment is tripped up, they're going to know right away. And basically, it takes your retained earnings available for distribution, and it decreases that number by any unrealized depreciation, net depreciation, and then it compares that to leverageable capital or regulatory capital, and calculates a threshold capital impairment. It's typically about 40% for most of the debenture funds. Where there's equity investments, it's a little bit higher. Where there's a significant amount of equity investments, it's a little bit higher. But we don't usually see that. That's really the exception in the debenture program, because everything's loan or debt instruments, not a big percentage of the portfolio in equities. So it's typically about a 40% impairment that's going to trip up the capital impairment ratio.
Another question, can you confirm which sections of the 468 are done in Excel and should be available if GPs are willing to provide?
So the 468 itself is not an Excel file. It's not created from an Excel file. And the portfolio company financial information, again, if it's a PEF client, that's definitely available in Excel. And it depends what data points you need, if it's available in Excel or not. I would think that most of the accounting data should be available in Excel from the accounting records. Some of the demographic information may not be available in an easy format in Excel. Like we have a report, but it's by portfolio company. So it's kind of looking across a bunch of different Excel tabs or Excel spreadsheets. It doesn't have it all kind of laid out in a column format. But some SBIC fund managers might be tracking that internally as well.
Another question, one missing data point in the 468 and 1081 seems to be the capital structure, i.e. revolver, term loan, mezz, preferred, common. Mm-hmm. Is there discussions on whether that will be included in the future?
So the 11P It depends how descriptive the fund manager is, but typically in the comments here, it will say if it's a senior secured first lien term loan, it'll say what kind of debt it is. But again, this is a free form field, so there's no, it's not like a drop down menu that they have to pick from, whether it's, you know, a revolver, things like that. And then type of shares would be, you know, usually it's preferred common, or, you know, if it's a class A, class B, that would be included in this equity shares description as well. So there is, you know, there's not a standard drop down, it's more of a free form. So funds may or may not include that information. But most of the time we do see in the comments like the seniority of the loan, and we do see the definitely preferred common shares, and typically it's like the class as well.
The last question we have from the audience so far is for periods 2 and 3 on the 20P, should the information be as of the end of the fiscal year?
That's a good question. Typically, this is quarterly. So if they're filing a December 31st 468, this would be September 30th, June 30th, and March 31st of 2020 for a fiscal year ends company. There are some firms that do it a little bit differently. It'll be, you know, the most current quarterly period and then the prior 2 annual periods. But the SBA instructions are the 3 most recent quarterly periods. And this information per SBA instructions is no more than a year in arrears. So it really shouldn't include a lot of prior year information. It should be with, you know, 3 periods within the past year. And it is usually on a quarter lag. So for December 31st, since you're filing by March 31st, the December information may not be available. So it's typically, you know, by the time you're filing anyway. So it's usually September 30th, June 30th, and March 31st. And then at March 31st, since you're filing by April 30th, you know, you would typically have December information there. So then you would update and have December 31st, September 30th, and June 30th information.
Great. Well, thank you for presenting today. We all appreciate it. And I don't see any further questions, so I think we can start to wrap it up. For those of you that joined late, I'll repeat the housekeeping information. The SBI Outlook virtual conference is still available for registration if you haven't already registered. The event happening this coming Tuesday. And the platform for that event is open if you want to start looking around the platform to be able to schedule networking events during the event. And Virtual Capital Links for April is also just open for registration. And I will leave it there. Thank you very much, Beth.
Okay, thanks, David, for having me. Appreciate it. Have a good day, everyone.